Hey there, and welcome to my review for the ASUS ROG Ally. This review will be the easy mode review, meaning it will be a more simplistic and approachable review for the casual user. We'll touch on all the different functions and features of this system, but in an easier to digest way. And with that in mind, let's dive right into this review. So getting into the technical specs of the ASUS ROG Ally, we have a 7-inch Full HD 1080p display. It's at a 16:9 aspect ratio. It has an IPS level display with a glossy finish. It's a high refresh rate anti-screen tearing display. It has a 40 watt-hour battery, so with that you can expect between 1 and 3.5 hours of battery life. It has the brand new AMD Z1 Extreme processor with 16 gigabytes of onboard RAM, 512 gigabytes of storage capacity, AI noise cancelling microphone, 2-system speaker with Dolby Atmos. It has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity, USB-C power supply, and 608 grams of total weight. Alright, so now we're going to take a look at the design of the ASUS ROG Ally. It's a very sleek looking device. It's very lightweight and comfortable. It has contoured edges along the corners that help fit inside your palms nicely, which is especially nice during some of the longer gaming sessions you'll probably have with this thing. Taking a look at the back side, we've got a dual air intake with the ROG logo on this grill and some funky reflective tape here. You got 2 buttons here that are programmable to whatever you like. On the top, you have a 3.5mm headphone jack, SD card reader. You got the XG mobile connector here for the external GPU support, as well as a USB here, which is meant for power and transferring data. You have the volume rockers here, and a power button with a built-in fingerprint reader. There's some unique buttons on the front as well here, which we'll get a little bit into, and it's rocking a traditional Xbox style layout. And with that, we're going to take a look into our next topic here, which is controls. Taking a look at the controls of the device, here we have a circular D-pad, we have analog sticks, analog triggers, which are pressure sensitive. So for those of you who are unaware, what that means is in certain games, such as racing games, where pressure dictates how far or how hard something goes, such as acceleration or brakes, the level in which you depress it gives you that next level of immersion that you don't get from traditional digital buttons. And then you have your regular face buttons, X, Y, A, and B, similar to the Xbox layout. And it has built-in vibration, so anytime you're in a game and it vibrates like it would in a game, it vibrates on the device. It has built-in motion controls as well. However, at this time, they're currently not implemented officially through the ASUS software. And here we're going to show you the difference when it's stacked up next to traditional controllers. Here we have it stacked up next to an Xbox One or Series controller. So very similar layout. Here we have it next to a PlayStation 5 controller. So the difference being the thumbstick placement is not staggered. And here we have it stacked up next to the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, where you can see the layout's fundamentally identical. Only difference is minor variances in the D-pad, and the face buttons are different. If you want a closer look and deep dive into the controller comparisons between the ASUS ROG Ally and all the controllers of the next-gen consoles stacked up against it, I highly recommend you stick around for the hard mode review, where we do a much deeper dive into the control comparison. Okay, taking a look at the software on the ASUS ROG Ally, it comes with Windows 11 built into it. So you get your traditional Windows experience on here. Take that as much of a pro and con as you will. It's a Windows experience in a handheld form factor. So in order for ASUS to help circumvent a bit of the cumbersomeness of using Windows on a touchscreen / controller based device, they have what's called the ASUS Armory Crate, which is toggled by pushing this button here. So when you press it, you should see is your game library. And so here it auto-populates all your games for you. So anything you install, whether it's through Steam or Battle.net or whatever launcher you're using, it will automatically populate on here to give you a bit of an easier time navigating this. You can add third-party applications as well to this if you so choose, depending on your level of tinkering that you like to do on your devices. And so aside from the game library, you get access to a bunch of different settings here. So here is a control mode setting that lets you adjust the controls, whether on your desktop mode or gamepad mode, and it'll show you what each button does alongside those. And from here as well, you're able to adjust the operating mode, which, depending on the level of performance or battery life you're trying to achieve here, this will help you get to achieve whatever it is you're trying to do in that regard. Here under the content section, you're able to see screenshots, things like whether or not you need updates to your device or not, as well as other really technical things you don't really need to mess around with. Maybe if you need the ease of use, you can download your extra game platforms from here, but otherwise, this probably is not a section you'll navigate too often. So getting out of Armory Crate, we'll go into the ASUS Command Center next. So from here, it's a very quick and easy way for you to manage all the little settings that you need to manage on your device without having to jump through hoops to do it. So you can adjust your brightness here, your volume here, the performance mode you're using is also adjustable through here. So depending on whether you're playing a high-end game or a low-end game, or you need more juice to get your game running as much as you want, this is how you quickly do it. You can automatically switch between control mode or desktop mode, but most of the time, by leaving this on auto, the device will take care of it for you. You can check your stats of your game if you like, if that's something you're into. You can change the brightness around the LEDs on your analog sticks through here, and adjust resolution on the fly if you so choose. Going back to the PC experience on this, you get access to the Xbox application here, which comes with 3 months of Xbox's subscription, where you're able to get access to all the Xbox games that are supported by PC on the Xbox Game Pass. So you're able to claim three months of that. So nice little bonus you get just for buying the ROG Ally. And with that as well, most people are probably just going to use Steam. Through Steam, you're able to navigate it traditionally or go through the big box mode, or big picture mode as they call it. That will let you navigate through all your titles in a nicer space than you would traditionally. And if most of your games are on the Steam ecosystem, perfect. It's all there for you. If not, you can always add them as well. And if you want to get a bit more customizable, you definitely can with this. It's a Windows PC. So for instance, I have something like Big Box here, which is another front end basically to populate your titles and organize them as you choose. And if you get into emulation and that kind of thing, it's really nice and handy for that too. And that's something more we'll touch alongside in the hard mode review of this section. So if you want to explore that a little more, learn a bit more, feel free to stick around for the hard mode review of this software section of the ROG Ally. Okay, so now diving into the gaming aspect of this, which is what we're all here for. We're going to start things off here with a little Sonic Mania. We're going to be running this in silent mode since it's a smaller title. This will help maximize your battery life and also the noise and heat that comes from the device. As you can see, this looks amazing on this display. Colors pop, everything looks really beautiful. It runs silky smooth, all at the lowest power draw that this device offers. Playing something like this, you'll probably get anywhere between 2 to 3 hours on this. I would say on the higher end, but just know when you're playing games like this, you want to adjust your power draw to be on the silent mode so that you can really maximize your battery life. There's other things to consider, such as whether you have your Wi-Fi turned on or the level of your brightness and stuff. And that's all things that you get to decide based on your play scenario and what you favor and prefer. So all these things are there to be kept in mind, but overall, running these kind of games on the ASUS ROG Ally, they look and run amazing, and you will not be disappointed with it. And here we have Vampire Survivors. So this is one of those games that will really take advantage of the high refresh rate screen smoothness. This is something you'll notice in especially the smaller title games like this or Sonic, where things just look and feel the smoothest they possibly can. That's in part to the nature that these games are not very difficult to run, and they don't even take that much power to achieve high fidelity. So things like this, you can run and experience super buttery smooth gameplay, as well as pretty good battery life. However, if you do want to conserve your battery life a little more, you would want to restrict it so that you don't have to take advantage of the full refresh rate of this display, because doing so makes your console work a little bit harder to push out that extra smoothness, and that means less battery overall. So up to you how that goes. That's all adjustable within the settings here. This is how you would do it, just for those who are unaware. This is what dictates the level of smoothness, the refresh rate. So that's Vampire Survivors. It's looking and running as good as it possibly can on here, and you'll have nothing but a great experience, especially on the smaller indie titles or easier to run video games on here. So with that, we'll move on to something a little bit heavier. Okay, next up we have Sekiro. We're going to do stuff that's going to challenge the console a little bit more now and be a bit more taxing to run. So this, we are definitely not running in the silent mode. You have to bring this up to something like performance or turbo. Here we're running this game at 1080p medium settings, and you can see it's looking and running really great. This is probably the most preferred way to play these kind of games because it's the perfect balance of visual fidelity and performance that you're going to get out of a handheld console like this. You can see, yeah, it's performing pretty well. If you want to take it up a notch just a bit more, you can hit this and go to turbo mode. In a game like this right now, the way we have it set up, the performance doesn't really jump up too much. What this will do is help you with any dips and stuff you might get while playing. However, that comes at the expense of your battery life. If you're running this game turbo mode, or pretty much any game for that matter in turbo mode, expect to play only for about an hour or maybe even 45 minutes, depending on how grueling the title is you're playing. So, double-edged sword using turbo mode, but you can get by just fine by playing this on the performance mode. Next up, we have one of the heavier hitting titles we have on the PC platform right now, in my opinion. It's Final Fantasy 15. We're running this game at 1080p here, and we're running it at average settings. So if you're in performance mode, you'll get respectable performance on this. Depending on where you are, you might see some dips, and that's just the nature of playing a big high-end game like this on the performance setting. You can drop down the graphics. I personally would like to play this game at a mixture of low and average because I feel like that would be the best overall compromise. However, to keep things simple for this video, I'm just showcasing these things in 1080p in like a medium setting type scenario. So you're getting around 30 FPS like this for the people who care about that kind of stuff, but I've been trying to keep this more geared towards the casual consumer for this part of the review, just so you get a general idea of how the game looks and feels. If you want a really deep dive on resolutions and frame rates and different things of that nature, I'll definitely explore that more on the hard mode section of this review. But performance mode, you'll be able to get by. This is a bit more of a populated area from what you'd expect from typical gameplay, so it does hurt the frame rate a little bit. It does run a little bit better in the open fields when you're exploring. But this is one of those games that'll definitely benefit from putting it on the turbo mode. This will give you probably around a 10 FPS bump, and you will definitely notice the difference in smoothness. But again, you will definitely notice the hit on your battery life. So if you're close by to a power outlet, totally fine, but I think performance mode is a good enough balance here if that is a concern that you have with this. Another thing I'll quickly mention is when you're playing these titles, when the device is actually plugged in, what will happen is on the performance profile you're on, whether it's performance or turbo, the Ally will actually get a little boost in performance from being plugged directly in. So if your games aren't running as good as you want, having it plugged in, such as like when you're docked to a TV or something, or just on your couch beside a power outlet, you will get a little extra bump in performance that way as well. So your performance mode will be even juicier and your turbo mode will be even more smooth than you had experienced before. So that about does it in terms of the gaming benchmarks that we have for this. Real quick before we finish this off, I'm going to show off the performance of the sound of the speakers, and I think this is the best game to showcase all that right now because this game has truly phenomenal music. So we will listen to how nice and clear and loud the speakers get on this thing, and I'll tell you right now, they sound great, especially for the form factor that they're in. So here we'll unplug this, and then we'll turn the volume up and just have a listen for a little and see what you expect from this. So as you can tell, it sounds really, really good coming from these speakers. You don't need to put the volume up that high. I'm just doing that for demonstration purposes, but usually I sit somewhere around like the 20 or 40 mark max, and it does more than enough than I need to hear these and experience everything really well with this device. On the subject of sound, we've been running in performance mode, and I'll bring this closer to the mic so you can hear, but it's really not all that loud, which is a really nice thing about this device. You know, despite the heavy hitting titles we're throwing at it, it runs quite cool and sounds very minimal with the exhaust fans, which is something that really they knocked out of the park with this. Running in turbo, you'll definitely hear it a little more, and we'll give it a sec to kick in and you can hear the difference. Last but not least, we're going to test this out now for outdoor viewing performance, so you can see what it's like for those of you who like to travel outdoors and play outdoors. So I feel like a lot of people online aren't really showcasing that, and this will be a good way for you to get an idea of what to expect when playing this outside. So here we have some outdoor gaming performance. We're running at the max brightness level here, and the game is very easy to see. This is a really good experience for playing in the outdoors. It doesn't feel like any detail is lost in a huge capacity. Obviously, being outdoors does hinder the viewing experience a little bit, but out here in the sunlight right now, it looks really good, and I don't really have any problems playing like this at all. Again, it is a little bit more dimmed. However, this is a very serviceable way to play games outside and not have any issues with major glare or loss in clarity. So here we are at the final weigh-in. given everything that we've gone over so far, I feel like the design of this console is very nice. They did a really good job on how everything is laid out and implemented. The tech specs on it are really good as well. It runs literally anything you throw at it. It's just a matter of how you want to set up your playing with it so that it can work optimally if that's something you really care about tinkering with. The controls are very responsive. They feel really good. No complaints in that regard. And the software is as good as of an experience you can get at this time on a Windows handheld. So it's not perfect. It is a little janky and hard to navigate at times. However, with the ASUS software they have baked in there, they do help give you the best experience you can possibly on Windows, as well as Steam's big picture mode. So you're not totally held back by the limitations of the design of Windows. You do have options, and it is a pretty good overall experience in that regard. And gaming performance, this does reasonably well, especially if you play games only in 720p. All the stuff I've shown you so far has been at 1080p, just so that you get an idea of what to expect when things are just running natively out of the box. It's quite serviceable at 1080p, and it does a really good job playing all new and old games. So when it comes to performance in a handheld form factor, I'd say this is a really, really good handheld. And on top of it, the fan noise is absolutely minimal, which is an incredible thing to have in something like this, in this form factor. And playing it outside, the screen does really well at showcasing how well it can handle everything, because outside at max brightness, it's still quite easy to see what you're doing. And what it really comes down to for you is if it's worth the price. Coming in at almost $900 before taxes retail, it's quite an investment. But at the same time, if you're a kind of person who wants to have all the games you want and own all in one place, this is the handheld to have right now. It does it all. It's all nice form factor. It's got a beautiful design, and it does everything you expect it to do. And it has room to push it far beyond if that's something you do require and want in a device. So, in my opinion, if you have no handhelds currently, this is an incredible device to pick up today. I don't want to get into other comparisons of anything else out there in this video. So for what it is, I'd say this is an incredible buy, and you will not be disappointed by the level of performance you get out of something like this. If battery life is something you're overly concerned about and use it in a highly transportable setting, then it's something to be a little concerned about whether or not it's worth it for you. However, battery packs are a thing, and they can help circumvent that, or if you're in a scenario where being plugged in is available to you, then that also helps mitigate that limitation. It's just a matter of what's your best use case when it comes to purchasing this piece of hardware. It's really difficult to just give a recommendation as a yes or no, because this is an awkward time where these devices are super powerful, but they're also kind of limited by their battery capacity at this point in time. So really, knowing all the information you can regarding this is your best tool to understanding whether or not this is right for you, because it all comes down to what you need at this point. Because at this point, we're not at a point where it does everything all in one, maximum power, maximum battery, maximum specs. Like this is a very, very good first attempt by ASUS, and it hits a lot of high points with it. But again, it just comes down to you reviewing exactly what it is you need and your use case to justify the purchase of this. If it works within your limitations or what you're willing to do to play this in your use case scenario, you will not be disappointed with it. This thing games, and you have everything available to make all the games you want to have happen at your fingertips with the ASUS ROG Ally. If you felt this review was helpful for you in any way, please consider liking the video or sharing or subscribing. And if you want just a little bit more to review for your own personal needs, there is the hard mode review of this where we dive a lot deeper into all the things we touched on earlier, and it'll give you a much better idea of what to expect when buying the ASUS ROG Ally. Thank you for watching. Hey there, and welcome to my review for the ASUS ROG Ally. This review will be the hard mode review, meaning it will be a deep dive into the system where we'll discuss all the nuances of it in depth. We'll explore all the different functions and features to their full extent, as well as showcase some in-depth performance comparisons. With that in mind, let's dive right into this review. So getting into the technical specs of the ASUS ROG Ally, we have a 7-inch 1080p Full HD display. It's a 16:9 aspect ratio. It's an IPS level display with a glossy finish. It has 100% sRGB. It's a 10-point multi-touch touchscreen with 120 Hz refresh rate and AMD FreeSync Premium. The response time is 7 milliseconds, with the brightness sitting at 500 nits. With the internals, we have the AMD Z1 Extreme processor. It's on the Zen 4 architecture. It's a 4 nanometer process, 8 cores, 16 threads, 24 megabytes of total cache, and up to a 5.10 gigahertz boost. The GPU is an AMD RDNA 3 with up to 2.7 gigahertz and 8.6 teraflops of performance. It's got 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM, 512 gigabytes of NVMe M.2 SSD storage. The size of this SSD is the 2230 size. It has a 9 to 30 watt total power draw. Now it's important to note that that's not the total power draw of the entire unit. That's just for the APU. The total system power can get upwards of 45 watts. It has an AI noise canceling microphone, 2-speaker system with Dolby Atmos, Wi-Fi 6E 802.11ax with triple band, and Bluetooth 5.2 for the wireless connectivity. It's a Type-C USB connector with a 65 watt AC adapter, and the entire thing is coming in at 608 grams for the total weight. Alright, so taking a look at the controls on the device, it has an Xbox 360/Series style D-pad. I say 360 because at first glance it's kind of reminiscent of the 360 D-pad. It makes you a little worried at first because it looks like it's that squishy kind that we all didn't like in that era, but I'm happy to report that it's very functional. It's very similar to the one you would see on the Xbox Series controller, so each movement on it feels pretty intentional, and I feel like I haven't had any problems trying to execute anything on this D-pad. So overall, that's a win. So rest assured, it's got a pretty good D-pad on this device. The analog sticks, I don't really have much to say. They function like traditional analogs. People online have complained that they feel kind of loose. To me, they feel just fine. Coming off the Steam Deck, if you're a little familiar with that, the Steam Decks are a little tighter. These are a little more free play, but that's really nitpicking at this point. It functions and feels very good when you play around with these analog sticks. You have Hall effect analog triggers on these, so as you probably know, what it means is when you depress them, the pressure is sensitive and increases the amount of command you get from them depending how hard you push them. It has HD feedback, so HD haptics are within the device, and it rumbles just like you'd expect from any traditional controller or console these days. The face buttons are in the A, B, Y, X traditional Xbox style, so it's pretty reminiscent of an Xbox controller basically. And you have a 6-axis gyro inside, so you get motion controls to, move any which way you want. Currently, it's unsupported in the software. ASUS hasn't enabled it yet, but if you use a program such as Handheld Companion or something of that nature, you can enable it yourself and configure it to work however you like. But just so you know, right off the bat, open box, you cannot use it yet. And so I'm going to go into a deep dive of how this controller and layout compares to all the controllers of the next gen consoles. So here we're going to rate the analog sticks, and I'm going to say the closest to the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. They have about the same looseness as them, and they move free and independently like the Nintendo Switch Pro controller does. So analogs closest to Nintendo. Next on D-pad, I'm going to give it closest to the Xbox Series controller, not the 360. Both have similar circular D-pads, but as anyone who's played with Xbox knows now, this is infinitely better than the 360 style. And to give you the comparison between the two, the one on the ASUS, it feels a bit softer compared to the Series, where it's very clicky and tactile, and each movement feels very responsive. Not to say that it's bad on this at all, it's still very good, just nowhere near as refined as you'd come to expect Xbox to have it at this point in the game. And with face buttons, we're going to give it to Xbox as well. These buttons are very reminiscent of playing with an Xbox controller. So the only difference is the ones on the ASUS ROG Ally, they're a little bit squishier. They're not as firm as they are on the Xbox controller, but not to say that they're bad by any means, they're just a little bit different. And for triggers as well, it's going Xbox. Are you seeing the theme here? These have very similar amounts of play to them, like the Xbox controller. So they feel very, very similar. They are a little bit harder maybe on the Xbox controller. Yeah, they're definitely harder. They're just a little bit more loose on the ROG Ally. And since for good measure, since we're doing this deep dive, you can see the differences for the Xbox controller style layout and the PlayStation style layout. You got the analog sticks down at the bottom rather than staggered. The D-pad here has no diagonal function built into it, but obviously it does work. And the buttons are also here. They're quite a bit harder, and these are similar to the Xbox style where they have a bit more resistance to them, but don't be deterred by the way that sounds. The way this console, if you will, handles is very nice overall. Just nowhere near as refined as PlayStation and Xbox, obviously, because they've had generations and generations to perfect it, where this is ASUS's first shot at the handheld market. And to say with the way the controls look and feel, I'd say they did a very good job on it with the ASUS ROG Ally. Okay, so exploring the software side of things here on the ASUS ROG Ally, you have full Windows 11 baked into this. So the really nice thing about that is you're able to access anything Windows on this device. The con of that is obviously navigating Windows on a handheld form factor. It's not exactly the most easy thing to do, but it's pros and cons for everything. You're able to get access to all the different launchers and emulators and whatever you want on this device and customize it to your heart's content. So it's all up to you whether that's a pro or con based on your level of tinkering and play style with how you go about using your games and devices. So what ASUS has done to help circumvent that jankiness a little bit is they have what's called the ASUS Armory Crate, which is toggled by pushing this button here. When you press it, it launches the ASUS Armory Crate program, and here it auto-populates all your installed games for you. So it's a nice way to unify all the things you have and make it a bit of an easier experience to navigate. You can also add extra programs if you like yourself. These don't auto-populate. For instance, my emulators here I have to manually add, but it's okay. It's not very hard to do. Another thing that you get out of this is you're able to navigate the settings of the device. So here, for instance, you can have the two different control options, gamepad and desktop mode. And within here, you're able to see all the functions assigned to every key as well as make your own. So for instance, here, these back buttons, they can function as secondary functions. So you can see here, if I press either one of them, underneath the view button, I have a macro set, and underneath the menu button, I have the Xbox button set. So when I'm out of this program and press the Xbox short key by pressing this and my menu button, it's going to bring up Steam for me because Steam is launched through the Xbox home button if you have Xbox Game Bar disabled, which I do. So that's just the way I quickly navigate to Xbox or Steam in an easy fashion, which also helps get into the Steam Big Picture mode a lot easier, which is something we'll explore a little bit later here. And so within the settings, you have access to the operating modes. These are obviously how you change the performance profile of the device, and you have a manual function as well. So if you're not happy with the performance you're getting from either of these, you can set your own manual fan curves and wattages, which I've done here. And so, yeah, that is the best way. You're going to either maximize performance or battery life depending on your use case scenario. We'll touch on the command center shortly, but here you're able to customize all the things you have access to your command center, and you're able to customize your lighting or your connections from here as well, or the color scheme of the display for whatever type of game you're playing. So lots of customizability all here in the settings section of the device here, and content, which pretty much gives you access to all your updates and whatnot through ASUS software, and just to see all the little technical aspects of your device in one easy place to manage it all. So now that we're done with the ASUS Armory Crate here, we'll go into the ASUS Command Center like I mentioned earlier. Here, you're able to quickly customize and change things on the fly. So here you can customize your brightness or volume level. You can quickly toggle between the performance modes that you're using, so you don't have to go through the Armory Crate and manually change it. It's all done very simple and easy through here. The control mode, there's auto, gamepad, and desktop. Auto generally does a very good job of responding to whatever program you're using here. Once you get into like the emulators and stuff, it's a little bit more cumbersome, but that's just the nature of this, and you have the quick ability to switch if need be. Real-time monitor brings up all your real-time stats here. So you can see the CPU percentage, GPU percentage, total power draw, battery life left. So lots of nice little things you can quickly access through here. You can change your LED brightness here, turn on RSR, which is a super sampling resolution mode here if you run below the 1080p display. You can quickly select what resolution you want to have running here, as well as the refresh rate. So nice, easy thing to have a lot of functions just at your fingertips here alongside the command center. So like I said earlier, you have access to all your different launchers here. Steam, as we all know, Steam is there, and you can run it in the big picture mode, and it gives you a very Steam Deck-like appearance. So it's almost like having a Steam Deck launcher within your ROG Ally if you so choose. And if you're really into the Steam ecosystem, all your stuff is just automatically here in a nice presented way for you. Obviously, you can add more things if you like, given that it's a PC, and where there's a will, there's a way. So you don't have to exclusively use Steam. Like, for instance, I have Big Box installed on here. For those of you who don't know, it's just another front end to organize all your content. So I have all my emulation and Windows games all installed on here. And it's just in a nice presentation, something a little different than your traditional layout, especially considering the ASUS and Steam. So you can customize this as much as you want, have different themes, etc. Literally, it's Windows, so you can do anything and everything you want with this device. So there are options. And last but not least, Xbox Game Pass is included with this. So within the Xbox Game Pass, you actually do get 3 free months with the ASUS ROG Ally just for buying the device. So that's pretty awesome. Nice little perk and benefit. Lots of great cool functionality and accessibility to all your games of all different platforms. You're not bound to just what's compatible with Linux or anything. You get everything, and you get everything all on this device. Okay, so diving into the gaming aspect of things here, we're playing Sonic Mania. We're running it on the silent mode, so this will give you the lowest power draw of the device. So you can see here through the stat monitoring that we're running at about 10 watts right now on the APU. It's hovering between 9 and 10. The game is running at 60 FPS. For some reason, even though in the configurator you're able to set for 120 Hertz, but this game I can't get to run at 120 Hertz on the ROG Ally for whatever reason. And we're drawing in a total power draw of 14, a little over 14 watts here. So it's a 40 watt hour battery, so that'll get you about 2.5 hours of battery, I'd say, based on the little math there I did in my head. And you can see the game is running flawlessly. It looks great on this display, and this is a great way to experience a game like this. It feels very smooth and plays really nice on these controls, and really it feels like it's meant to play on a device like this. So you'll have nothing but a good time if you're playing this, and it's one of the best case battery usage scenarios as well when playing a title like this on the ASUS ROG Ally. So now we're going to move on to something a little different. And with that, we'll get into the next game. So next up, we've got Vampire Survivors, another 2D game that doesn't take much to get running. We're still running at the 10 watt operating mode, and you can see we're getting 120 FPS here. So this game is a title you'll be able to get the maximum amount of performance out of, and it will still keep a good draw on your battery. We're at 9 watts here, so you can see it's running here at a total power system draw of 14 watts, 14.14. So again, doing a little mental math there, you're getting about 2.5 hours or so of battery. And this just comes down to your personal preference. Obviously running games at higher frame rates is going to draw more power, so you could limit it to 60 if you like, or even less. On a game like this, it doesn't matter, but also it's nice to appreciate that extra little bit of smoothness you get from running at the higher frame rates. And let's be honest, if you're buying a device like this, you want to take full advantage of things like that. So these kind of small indie titles or 2D games, this console has zero problem running them at high fidelity with low power. So if that's the style of game you're into, you're going to have nothing but a good time playing this. All right, so now we're going to jump into something a little more performance heavy. Here we are, we're running Sekiro. I'm running this right now in 720p at medium settings, and we're getting 60 FPS. It runs and feels really great on this, and it looks real good as well. 720p is probably the best sweet spot to performance and visual fidelity if you want to get the most out of this system overall, in terms of battery and performance and overall looks. I'd say 720p is the best way to go if you're playing new, big, heavy running titles, but it's all down to personal preference. We'll dive into some 1080p performance really quick here, and you'll see the difference. 1080p, generally you might have to drop down the settings a little bit to get it going if you want that extra little bit of crispness. And if you are someone who cares about that, you can definitely tell and appreciate the difference. But again, it's all down to your personal preference when it comes down to stuff like this. So we're going to set this down now, and I'll show you the difference running at 1080p. Okay, so now we've got the game set for 1080p. We're still running medium settings, and you can see the frame rate's dropped down to 37 FPS. It's important to note here, right now we're getting 15 watts out of the APU here. When you're in performance mode, a lot of the times it likes to boost to 20 watts for 2 minutes before it calms down. So right now, we're getting the stable performance that you would expect from running this machine and games on it at this level. So 1080p, we're getting over 30 frames per second. It feels pretty smooth on it still because of that AMD FreeSync display. So games will look and run and feel pretty good for the most part playing at 1080p, as long as you temper your expectations and decide to play with the graphic quality settings. I find in my experience to get the best performance in 1080p to drop the games to low settings. It's just the nature of what we have here right now if you're worried about battery life. As you can see here, we're getting 23 watts on the battery in total power draw, so that's going to give you just under 2 hours, so maybe 1.5 hours worth of battery when you're playing in the performance mode. Putting it into turbo mode will greatly increase the performance you get and smoothness, but will also greatly increase the amount of power you take from the battery. So As you can see here, we've got quite a decent bump in performance. We're getting 47 FPS right now. So that feels and looks even better now. It feels like we're playing in a territory where you don't really have to be at 60 to appreciate the smoothness. It does look and feel great, and quite honestly, you could probably just turn off the stats and still feel like this is an adequate level of smoothness to have in a gameplay experience. So as you can see here, right now the system is going at 42 watts. So that's well over the 40, meaning you're going to get just under an hour's battery life playing like this. So again, it comes down to your personal preferences, whether battery is a concern for you or maximum graphical fidelity and frame rate is important to you. With this device, it's a bit of a game of playing what works best for you. It's not going to be a one does all. And if you're really in a position where you don't care about battery life at all, you can take your power cord, plug it in, and by plugging in the device, it actually increases performance even more. So if you're playing this in a docked setting, playing on the turbo mode, you can see we're just underneath 60 FPS right now. We're hovering at 55. So this is the best way to play on the ROG Ally if you're wanting maximum performance. So a TV-based scenario may be your best bet, believe it or not, instead of handheld, because it has that little extra bit of reserved power for when you're plugged in. So with that, we're going to switch into another game now, one that's probably an even bigger heavy hitter. So stick around and we'll see how that turns up. Okay, so next up we've got Final Fantasy 15. We're running it at 720p average settings, so you get an idea of what the middle ground of this will look like. It's pulling 14 watts right now on the APU, 15 hovering between the two, and we're getting about 43 FPS. So it looks and runs really good in this type of scenario. And it's pulling 24 watts on the battery. So you're going to get just under 2 hours of battery life playing like this. And as you can see, taking a look at everything, it's a really great experience. Everything about this looks and feels good. And if you're not too crazy about detail, like, this is a really good solid way to play the game. I feel like playing these modern games at 720p is the best way to go if you want to strike that balance between graphic quality and resolution and battery life. If you did want to kick things up a notch though, you always do have the ability to throw it into turbo. So right now, if we throw it into turbo mode, we're going to jump up in performance, and in just a sec we'll see just about how much. So we're rocking 33 watts right now, 34 watts on the APU, and now we've jumped up to the 50s in our FPS. So right now we're getting 57, 58 FPS. This is a really good, smooth, excellent experience if you want to play a game like this on the go. It looks and feels really good. Like, you cannot be upset with this level of performance from a game like this running on a handheld. But as you see here, 42 watts on the battery. That's going to give you under 1 hour of battery life. So it's up to you to decide what you prefer or what you prioritize. It's just that simple thing of where we're at in technology right now, where battery life has just not kept up with the amount of power we've got in these handhelds. And so if you do want to take things a little step further, plugging this in will give us yet another performance boost. So when plugged in, the power watt draw is going to go even higher. When we put it on turbo performance mode, we're going to see this thing shoot up 50 watts. That is huge. And we're getting at 60 FPS with this. So this is a very, very solid experience. We're even over 60 FPS at the 720p resolution. This, if you're playing docked, is the best way to play, because you're just going to get an absolute killer amount of performance from games like this, and it won't hold back because you got that little extra bit of juice sitting on the console. So this could very well be your own all-in-one console replacement if you just play PC games. It's a great way to experience these things. So next up, we're going to switch over to 1080p and go through all the performance modes so you can get a better idea of what to expect in that realm. Okay, so now we're at 1080p here. still on average settings. The clarity increase is quite noticeable. Playing in 1080p on this device is a treat. So currently I'm on the performance mode. I've chosen to show you this running at the beginning of the performance mode when it's boosted up to 20 watts. So in the next minute or so, you'll see it drop down and you'll see just how that affects the frame rate. So performance mode, 20 watts, we're drawing 31, almost 32 watts of power. So that's going to give you less than 2 hours of battery life, which is generally when you're playing the AAA titles, expect less than 2 hours. So we're sitting at around 36 and it feels pretty good and pretty smooth for the most part. This is an acceptable way to play the game, especially at 1080p. As I said earlier, my preferred method is to drop games like this in 1080p to their low settings because you'll get a better frame rate, obviously, from doing so. So by the time we hit down to 15 watts, I suspect we're going to be right around the 30 FPS region or maybe even a touch below. So this is where you can see playing games in 1080p is a bit of a mixed bag, and it really comes down to making some compromises where we're at right now. We're almost at that point where you can play the games you want however you want without any worry about graphic settings or battery life or power, but we're not quite there yet. So this is a perfect example of that, and it looks like it's starting to reduce its power now. The boost is subsiding, and like I said, we're getting right around 30 FPS. So this is what you would expect in a normal case scenario. The boost doesn't last long. It's only 2 minutes usually. So here we are running the game in what you'd expect in a normal performance mode, and we're getting just under 30. So in this instance, I would recommend either lowering your graphics quality a bit, like I said, or this is where having the turbo mode comes into handy. So playing at 1080p turbo, forgoing any worry about battery, we're back up over 30. We're at 37 FPS right now. So that's really comfortable to play at. It feels really smooth on the FreeSync display. And honestly, if you want to play with good graphics, this is the best way to do it. We are sitting at 38 watts, so you will get a little over an hour playing this way. It's jumped to 42 now, so a little under an hour. And that's just to be expected when playing in turbo mode on these AAA titles. So in my opinion, which we haven't got into yet, but since you've stuck around, my best thing to do here is actually create a manual mode at 18 watts. There's many people online saying this is the sweet spot for performance and battery life, and this is your best way to get a 1080p 30 FPS experience and have a comfortable experience overall. So as you can see here, we're 18 watts on the APU and we're sitting a little bit higher than 30 FPS here. So this is the best overall way to play games, in my opinion, when you're playing AAA titles. The wattage draw doesn't update in real time, so this may not be indicative of the total power draw right now, but we're sitting at 32, which still gives you over an hour of gameplay. It's dropped down to 31 now, so you could stretch these out to be maybe an hour to an hour and a half gameplay if you're playing on a custom operating mode like the 18 watt one. So a little better than the performance mode, a little extra juice, but in my opinion, very worth it and the best way to experience your AAA titles. Okay, getting into the emulation side of things now. Here I've got Big Box open up. For those of you who don't know, this is just the front end to manage all your different games and emulators if you want. I'm not going to show anything PS2 or below because the ROG Ally has no problem getting through those kind of titles. We're just going to hit the harder to emulate stuff here. So I'm going to start with Xbox and we're going to boot up Ninja Gaiden Black here. I'm running these games at 2x resolution on the Xbox emulator, XEMU, however you're supposed to say that. You're going to get a 15 watt power draw and 60 FPS pretty much by playing in this way. You can play at 3x resolution if you choose to. I've done it and I personally don't see a visual difference in doing so, but I do see a performance hit. So you will get little drops here and there, or sometimes even more significant drops playing in that way. So for myself, I prefer just to keep it at the 2x resolution and performance mode, and you'll be doing just fine playing that way. So I'm going to walk right here into a little boss fight area, and it'll really flex what the game's got to offer on this. So you'll be able to see how well this really handles emulation with this. So a little bit of a frame rate drop in that section, but nothing that really kills the experience by any means. And we're getting a pretty rock solid 60 FPS out of this right now. So this is a great way to play Xbox games, especially given how hard they are to emulate. This little machine can do it all. This is one of the more annoying boss fights in the game if you have ever played it. There's, in Ninja Gaiden, always way too many guys to manage than you can expect to in a normal game. So there's a reason why these games are known for being as hard as they are. But you can't say the reason why you're doing bad playing this is because it's not running well. It's running just as well as it normally would in almost any way. So with that, we're going to move on to our next game. All right, and now we're running Conker's Live and Reloaded on Xbox. So here you can see 15 watts. We're getting just underneath 60. If anything, we are hitting 60. So this is the best way to play this game on the ROG Ally. We're playing at the 2x resolution. As I said before, we could bump it up to 3, but especially in a game like this, I've noticed that the frame rate dips, especially in these cutscenes, it definitely happens more than you'd like to, and that 2x is just the perfect experience to have on a game like this, especially on this device. So you won't have any problems doing it. The game looks incredible, it's running incredible, and as we've said before, Xbox is hard to emulate, so to see this level of performance on this is really, really awesome, and it's definitely more than playable and enjoyable. Running it at this performance setting, we're getting 22 watts on the battery, so you're going to get just under 2 hours playing like this. So emulation at performance mode, it does well. It's a big win in my opinion when it comes to emulating big high-end titles on this console. All right, moving on to Xbox 360. We've got Ninja Gaiden 2 going on this. If you can't tell, I kind of like Ninja Gaiden. We're running on the performance mode here, and we're getting 60 FPS, which is pretty incredible to see Xbox 360 games on here running so well. And the game looks phenomenal. It's running on default settings, which I assume is somewhere in the terms of what normal Xbox runs at. So this is probably running at 720p, but I can't totally verify that. But it looks and runs really, really good. Much better than I ever expected it to. So this is a big win when it comes to emulation, especially on the higher end systems of this console. Alright, our next game here for Xbox 360 is Lost Odyssey. So we're going to run this as well on the performance setting. You're going to get close to a near-locked 60 FPS experience on this game. This is one of those titles, though, that will benefit from the extra bit of juice you can give it if you want to jump up into other modes. So you can see here we're getting just under 60. The game still feels very smooth, even if it's sub 60. So you won't really notice the performance dips if you leave it like this, and you will get the benefit of max battery life on this. But again, this is also one of those titles that would benefit from having that little extra bit of power. Turning it up to 18 watts like I have on my manual mode, it does help alleviate some of the dips. However, it won't give you a super locked 60 FPS performance. In this battle, however, it's not a big deal. It's not really flexing as hard as it needs to in this game. So you'll notice once we do get out of battle though, the frame rate will still continue to drop below 60 FPS. So we're hitting 50s right now. And this is one of those games, like I said, when we hit turbo, it's going to really give it everything it needs. However, it seems to be doing pretty well on the 18. I have noticed in the past, especially on the introduction sequence of this game, which is probably one of the heavier moments of this title, that running it on the turbo mode is what's going to give you almost a locked 60 FPS experience. However, through normal gameplay and such, the game isn't as demanding, so it depends on your level of comfort with whatever you want in terms of performance. So I personally think running it in performance or at an 18-watt custom power profile is the best way to go about it. You can see the frame rate is still very respectable, and that's just looking at this. If you took this away, you wouldn't even notice that it's really dipping in frames. So this is a definitively good way to play a game like this with good performance and battery life. And to my surprise, this is an incredible experience running Xbox 360 games on a handheld. This is wonderful. Moving on to some PS3 emulation here, we have Asura's Wrath. This is one of those easier to emulate titles, so we're running the performance mode here, and we're getting a bit of stutter just because of the compilation of shaders, unfortunately. That's something you can't really avoid on your first time playing things, but in time that will subside, and when you come back to play it next, it won't be a problem anymore. So once things start to settle down, we get a pretty rock solid frame rate on this. You'll have no problem hitting 30 FPS on here. And we're doing it at the performance mode, so you'll have best battery life possible when running these high-end titles like this. Again, yeah, you can see the stuttering is happening quite frequently, but it does calm down, it starts to disappear, and it becomes a much more fun experience when that happens. So be patient when it comes to emulation with PS3. It isn't as easy or seamless as running, say, a Super Nintendo emulator or something, but once it gets going, it really shines. And a game like this is such a large spectacle. Playing on a wonderful console like this is a nice treat. We are playing in 720p. That's pretty much the default resolution of all PS3 games anyway, so running in 1080p is just not totally feasible yet on these platforms. You need kind of a higher end gaming PC to get into 1080p or 4K levels of performance. So it does look and feel really good though. And like I said, it's a good compromise when it comes to your battery life and stuff, because we can do this on the performance mode, which is awesome. Later we'll get into some heavier titles, and that'll help us see what it's like to run in some other modes, because not all titles are the same. This happens just to be one of those ones that will get by on a low performance profile. So let's move on to something else to really see what this thing can do. Here we're running Resistance 2, same thing, 720p like I mentioned before. That's going to be indicative of all the titles I play on here for PS3. We're running on the performance mode, and we're getting 30 FPS on this, so pretty good performance, I'd say. It will dip here and there at times, and with that you can either use the 18-watt power profile or jump all the way up to turbo. It depends on what's happening in the game. Like the big set piece moments, you'll definitely notice that the frame rate will dip a lot, and that's just inevitable when you're doing this higher level emulation. So it's pretty hit or miss what kind of performance you're going to get at what different times. You're fine to play in turbo or manual and get a pretty good overall experience, I'd say. However, turbo mode will come in handy and help stabilize any of those frame drops that occur as well, and just give you an overall pleasant experience. And do keep in mind that if you wanted to, you could plug this in and get a little bit extra performance. So you could be playing in performance or turbo on this plugged in and get a little bit extra juice. I'll definitely be showcasing that in a little bit here with the next title, so you get a good idea of what to expect when it comes down to playing around with all those different modes and on the type of load that you're putting on this. And up next we have God of War 3. This is probably one of the hardest titles you will have to emulate on this console. And here on the performance mode at 15 watts, we're getting about 40 plus FPS, which looks and feels pretty good, and is pretty on par with the level of performance that you do get on PS3. So this is a great way to play the game. Naturally, we could up the performance a bit here by changing to the other performance modes. So let's start with manual to see what the little extra boost in wattage gets us. So we are still hovering around the 40 region, and kicking things up to turbo will definitely put us in the best case scenario here. So turbo mode, we're hitting over 45 FPS now and getting really, really good performance. Even jumping into 60 in some regards. So God of War can be fully playable, and this little machine can do quite a bit of work when it comes to emulation. Keep in mind, this is 720p, and we have all the different hacks enabled and mods in order to get this going to this level of performance. So this is definitely very playable. It looks and runs incredible, and if we really, really want to take it to the absolute limit, we'll do plugged in turbo, and this will showcase just exactly how much power you got out of this. So once we get all the juice going into this thing, we're hitting almost 60 FPS. That is really, really incredible to see this game, because we know this is one of the highest level of graphics on PS3 available. Definitely pushes the system to its limit, and it's definitely pushing this system to its limit, and it'll only get better in time when emulation improves on these lower end devices. Naturally, a high-end gaming PC would have a much easier time doing something like this, but on a portable, this is really, really awesome. You'd be hard pressed to find a better handheld experience in playing games like this on the ROG Ally. And with that, we'll move on to our next console. Next up, we're running Yuzu on this. This is Metroid Prime Remastered. We're playing on performance mode here, and you can see we're getting a solid 60 FPS on this. Now, much like the RPS3 emulator, you will get some shader compilation stutter every now and then, so nothing is going to be absolutely perfect on this. So when you're first experiencing some things, it's just not going to work out exactly perfect, but it does work really, really well. That being said, Yuzu currently is not the best experience on the ROG Ally, because there are graphic bugs which the Yuzu team attribute to bugs within the graphics driver for this ROG Ally currently. So in time it will improve. However, currently you can see there's little red dots appearing where they're not supposed to be. And in the other big game that everyone's thinking about running on this, there are graphic bugs all over the place, all over the open world, and you do not get a rock solid 60 FPS on that game either. That is definitely the hardest game to emulate on this system, and you'll sit around a comfortable 30 FPS if you're playing on the performance mode. And unfortunately, with the way this emulator is set up, it seems it doesn't really take advantage of the extra power in a super meaningful way. The best way to get the most performance out of it is to plug in and play on turbo if you want to run that game at a super high frame rate. You can run it just at the native 30 FPS. You can, however, modify it to be up to 60. However, you will not hit that on this device at all, even at 720p. But the plugged in and turbo, either or combined, will be your best bet to squeeze every little extra bit of juice out of this to improve the performance. And it does help some. However, it is not perfect, and this emulator does have a long way to go still. They've done a really good job updating it over this last year, and it's come quite a long way, and I'm sure in the future we'll have an even better experience. But for now, this is pretty good. It's not perfect. You're probably better off playing it on a Switch, but having everything all in one, it's still a really good experience, and it looks really nice on this screen. Before we end things off here, I'm going to give you a taste of what it feels like to hear the sound on the different performance profiles on here. So with the silent mode, you can hear what the fan sounds like, and it's basically whisper quiet. You do not really hear this thing going when you're running on silent. So let's take a second to listen and hear what it sounds like. Inaudible. You can't really hear anything. This is a lighter weight title, obviously, and lightweight titles won't draw very much power. If you were to play something a little heavier, you would hear the fans maybe a little bit, but in its current state, it is whisper quiet. So we'll move on to performance mode next. So here in performance mode, we're running Final Fantasy 15 again, and this is a good way to really see what this thing will do when it's running in terms of fan speed. So here we're hitting the 20 watt limit, and we will take a listen to what it sounds like when the fans are going. Again, it's pretty inaudible, so the ASUS ROG Ally does a really good job of keeping the noise levels down. If there's anything to celebrate in extreme levels about this device, it's how quiet it is under load. So now we're going to boost it up to turbo mode and take a really good listen, and you'll see exactly how much louder it can get. So when the fans do start to ramp up, you can hear it going, but in all honesty, it's not that bad. And especially if you have the game sound running, it's not something you'll really notice or feel like is really overtaking the experience or causing any sort of hindrance on it. And with that in mind, talking about game sound, let's get into the way these speakers actually sound. So right now I've got them set at the maximum volume, which is a worst. So you can hear those things are really loud, and you do not need to run it at a level 100 on the volume scale there, but I'm doing it just to make sure that the microphone picks it up really well for your hearing. So normally I sit at around maybe a 20 to 40 range, and that is very comfortable to hear everything going on in your games. And you could hear from just how loud it got, it sounds really crisp and clean and really good high quality speakers. And having this game, it has a phenomenal soundtrack as well, so we're going to go into the menu music and you can hear music going at the same time off these speakers. This game has a phenomenal soundtrack, and I think is a really good way to showcase what these speakers can do. And as you heard, it sounds really, really good. So no need to wear any sort of high quality headset or anything when you're gaming on this thing, because the speakers coming out of here are more than adequate, and they're more than good enough to overpower what little fan noise there actually is on this device. Last but not least, we're going to test this out now for outdoor viewing performance, so you can see what it's like for those of you who like to travel outdoors and play outdoors. So I feel like a lot of people online aren't really showcasing that, and this will be a good way for you to get an idea of what to expect when playing this outside. So here we have some outdoor gaming performance. We're running at the max brightness level here, and the game is very easy to see. This is a really good experience for playing in the outdoors. It doesn't feel like any detail is lost in a huge capacity. Obviously, being outdoors does hinder the viewing experience a little bit, but out here in the sunlight right now, it looks really good, and I don't really have any problems playing like this at all. Again, it is a little bit more dimmed. However, this is a very serviceable way to play games outside and not have any issues with major glare or loss in clarity. So here we are at the final weigh-in of the ASUS ROG Ally. It has incredible tech specs. We know it has the 8-core processor in there, which is pretty beefy, especially if you're getting into high-end emulation on this device. It plays everything you can throw at it. You can play between 720p and 1080, customize and tweak that to your liking based on your use case scenario. This will do 1080p, which is incredible, and the 120 Hz refresh rate is a joy to have when you're able to push your games to that level of performance. One of the things about it, though, is it's hard to push things to that level of performance in this little unit because modern games require a lot of power, and this thing has the power, but it doesn't have the battery to support that, unfortunately. So really, it just comes down to your use case scenario. If you're around power outlets, or if you have external batteries, or battery life is just not a concern for you at all, this thing puts out the power to play anything you want at really high refresh rates and frame rates. And you can do it all with this device if you want, and battery is not something you're concerned about. That 40 watt-hour battery is currently a limitation when it comes to gaming full-fledged experiences on devices like this right now. We would love to see them increase in time, but for what we have now, this is a pretty good attempt. However, it is, in my opinion, a little bit disappointing when it comes to playing games in maximum fidelity, which is what they're really advertising here. So it does have that potential at the end of the day. It's just doesn't have the battery to support it, unfortunately. So really it comes down to your use case on how to recommend this device, because at $899 retail, this thing has everything you need to play all the games you want in one little device. You can play your PC games, you can play all your emulators, you can play games from different launchers like Battle.net or Origin or what have you, all in one device without worrying about operating system limitations or anything of that nature. It's full Windows, it does it all well. The controls are super tight, they feel good, the design of the console is excellent. Overall, there's not a lot to hate about this other than battery, in my opinion. So this is why it all comes down to your personal preference. It's really hard to recommend something like this to a broad audience because we're at that point where technology is really great, but the battery won't support it to its full potential. So it really just comes down to what you need and what you want. So my best way to suggest whether or not this is for you is to just really analyze how you will use this and if it's right for you at this time. Take from everything I've done here today and use that to make your best judgment call. At the end of the day, it's up to you and you will figure out for yourself. But if you do decide to pull the trigger on this, you will not be disappointed in the level of performance and beauty that you get from this device. If you felt this video was helpful to you in any way, please consider liking the video, sharing, or subscribing. I hope you found this review to be informative and helpful towards making your decision whether or not to purchase the ASUS ROG Ally. Thank you for watching.